We really appreciate you coming. It's rare that we can get people together for this much time to talk about the complex topic of forestry across the landscape, across a landowner base that varies, uncertain pressures. Each land steward is tasked with the ecological management of very different forested areas that vary by richness, that vary by it's how we use them as well. Tonight we're trying to touch on an important issue in an important way. We're going to talk about it together in discussion and appreciation of what everybody brings to the conversation, and everyone each other's needs and talents. So we're really excited. I want to start off with just thanking our sponsors here tonight, New Belgium. Sarah, thank you so much. From the very beginning, Sarah had her sustainability mindset, was locked in on what EcoForesters was trying to accomplish, and they've been a big supporters of ours from the beginning. Bucci Kombucha, I think I saw Janine here somewhere. There she is. Thank you so much for your support. Neil and Amy Hanks Family Foundation are also big supporters of ours, as well as National Land Realty. Pat Snyder, right over here, is also a board member of ours. All four of these businesses were founding investors in our forest fund, and we appreciate their contributions to putting a value on the natural services that we often take for granted. Raise your hand if you're an EcoForester board member. We got several throughout here. There's Josh, Rob, Linda, Jay, Pat, Alex, Bruce. Rob Lamb, our founder and board treasurer, is in Vermont, could not make it. And it's too bad because this is his vision that we are acting out right now. And we're so appreciative of what he's done. Also want to just briefly mention that it's so important that this work that we're all trying to accomplish has the support of our communities and our politicians and our government on the local, state, and federal level. We're pleased to have all three represented here. Robin Ramsey with Senator Tillis' office is here. We have Representative Rudolph and Ager from the state legislature here. Terry Wells, the county commissioners are here. These are people that are solving hard problems, and it's important that they understand the important role forests are playing in our communities and with economic development in the region. Thank you all very much for being here. Perhaps the biggest VIP who is here in spirit is Tom Ruane. I'm trying to do this without getting choked up because Tom left this earth way too early in January. There's a board right here that talks about Tom, and this is a way that we're honoring his legacy and support for EcoForesters. For those of you who didn't know Tom, he was a force like no other. As a board member, he always had a story. You're never quite sure where that story was going to go or how long it was going to last, or if he had a point. But eventually he would get to something roundabout. But he cared about our mission and he poured his time and energy into helping us grow to where we are today. And he's smiling right now because we have a diverse group of people in the same room talking about big problems and big ideas. So I raise glass. Tom Ruane. Thank you, everybody. We miss you, but your spirit and vision live on. We've also got some pretty cool VIPs up here on the stage as well, who are here tonight, thankfully. Before I turn it over to them, I was going to ask, how many acres of forest do we have in North Carolina? Anybody other than North Carolina Forest Service can answer this question. Just yell it out if you know. Anybody? Not enough. 18 million acres of statewide. That's about 60% of the land base. How about Western North Carolina? Say the 26, 27 westernmost counties. Of that 18 million. 8? I guess of 8? 12? We wish. So about 4. But we're lucky that they're diverse and they're incredible. But I wanted to bring that up because it's that 4 million acres that we're going to be referencing the most as we talk tonight. A lot of the challenges that we're going to be talking about go up and down the East Coast and the Appalachian Mountains, but we're going to be referencing what's going on here in Western North Carolina. I'm going to let each of the panelists kind of introduce yourself. What's my line style? You can give us your name and your affiliation, and if you're responsible for managing acreage, give us a feel for how many acres are under your responsibility.
Great, thanks, Lane. Hey everybody, I'm James Malonis. I'm the forest supervisor for the National Forests in North Carolina. There's 4 forests that we manage here: the Nantahala, Pisgah, the mountains, the Uwharrie, and the Piedmont, and the Croatan on the coast of North Carolina. Altogether, that's about a little over 1.2 million acres that we manage of some of the most visited and biodiverse national forests in the system. So we're very proud and humbled to be able to steward those lands.
Shio Megada, Tommy K. Daga Dawasi, I said hello, my name is Tommy K. and I'm from Birdtown. It is in my DNA that we once managed all of Western North Carolina, northeastern South Carolina, northern Georgia, northeastern Alabama, eastern Tennessee, southeastern Kentucky, and southwestern Virginia. Sadly, we have 56,000 acres we call home. I am glad to be here to see stewards of concern about forest management. Just so you know, there is no word in our language representing forestry. We were all foresters. And I am here representing my ancestors. All this land that you see around you was once land that we belonged to. And we're at a place now to make a presence with what little traditional ecological knowledge we have. And we are planning on using that to contribute to the healthy status of our forest scheme. Thank you.
I'm Hani Meter. I'm Conservation Director with Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, a nonprofit land trust based here in Asheville. We work everywhere from the highlands of Rhone and then all the way down to the Balsam Mountains in Jackson and Haywood County. We're in Tennessee and North Carolina. And all in all, we hold conservation easements with private landowners who want to protect their land permanently. And we also own and manage land, and we transfer land sometimes to the U.S. Forest Service or the different state agencies. Total right now, we have 56,000 acres in conservation that we're responsible for monitoring. We worked over the years on over 90,000 acres. But of those 56,000 acres, we own 13,000. So that's what we're actively managing on our own.
I'm Andy Tate. I'm the Forestry Director at EcoForesters, and we have hundreds of clients over Western North Carolina, probably about 200,000 acres total we have under some kind of forest management. We either write plans for people, or a lot of the partners that are on stage, we actually provide boots on the ground to help them implement the work they have going on as well. So that's what we do.
Good evening, my name is Michael Cheek. I'm with the North Carolina Forest Service. I'm the Assistant Regional Forester of our Western Regional Office here. The North Carolina Forest Service is really responsible for all the lands within North Carolina, and that actually is about 32 million acres or so. We work in urban forests, we work in wild forests, but we're here to mostly work with private landowners. We help some other state agencies, we work with the U.S. Forest Service, but we work primarily with private landowners to help them manage their properties.
Hey, good evening. I'm Rob Elliott. I'm registered forester in North Carolina. I'm the fiber supply manager for the Canton Mill and serving as president of the North Carolina Forestry Association this year. Don't own or manage that many acres. Personally, about 7.87. Wish it was 10.01 in Buncombe County, but we for years have been out in West North Carolina with a landowner management program that allowed landowners to enter into Forest Stewardship Council, so FSC, or Sustainable Forestry Initiative, SFI, management plans, that was more of a landowner service to help steward their land. So at the peak, we had about 80,000 acres in Western North Carolina, kind of west of 77. So, yeah, that's me.
I'm Alex Finkel, excuse me, President and CEO of Eastwood Forests. We're a new Forestland investment manager. And as of today, I manage 0.7 acres in Chapel Hill, where we live, where our company is based. But at the end of last year, when our company was bought, I was the chief forester with the Forestland Group. We managed about 2 million acres in eastern North America. And I'm going to just take a moment to veer off script because a little over 30 years ago, I went to Fort Collins, Colorado to study forest management. I worked part-time at a little lumber yard called Moss and Lumber. And right on the other side of the chain link fence, it was this dinky, rotten little brewery getting started. And I drove a forklift most of the time, about once a week. I drive a forklift out and around to help New Belgium, this little fledgling thing, lift a new tank into place, or lift their forklift back onto the road they got. So I realized tonight that this is sort of the 30-year anniversary or more of me talking about forests and drinking New Belgium beer.
Can I add so Oscar? I went to Colorado State too. Yeah. In 2003. So this is my 20-year anniversary of talking to New Belgium and Fort Collins, Colorado. Contributed to the cause.
Not in the same way, but you know, the way a college student. Alex.
Well, Alex also didn't mention, he's probably embarrassed by it, because as a Carolina man, he teaches at Duke.
That's the Duke's Nicholas School of the Environment in Durham. I've done the teaching there in their forestry department.
So we've got a pretty interesting cross-section of folks that are responsible for stewardship of forests in North Carolina. And we're here tonight to hear from some of the challenges that these people that are dedicated to science, the science of forestry. In our invitation, we referenced some of the challenges that we're seeing around climate change and extreme weather, development pressures, and most recently the closing of the Canton paper mill. And this is in addition to other stressors that are on our forest now, like invasive plants and species decline. So there's a lot going on, a lot of stress happening in our forest and pressure, and we really want to understand what some of the challenges are that these groups are facing. Alex, you've got a microphone. As an academic, you probably face challenges in the classroom every day. Is there anything jump out at you you'd like to add?
Are we starting with challenges in forestry kind of broadly in this region?
Yep, exactly.
Well, I'm going to shamelessly steal a chapter from the Tara Kaiser playbook here, talk about forest management and the visualization of forests here. And what we're seeing because of climate change and land management and particular kinds of harvest practices, a change in species composition that is occurring and will continue to occur well within our lifespans. And I don't think I'm in a position to judge if that's good or bad. I mean, I have personal feelings about that, but it will be significant in terms of wildlife and other ecosystem services, watershed, water quality, carbon sequestration kinds of issues that are important to all of us. So I would kind of throw that out there as one of the biggies on a longer term scale. Really the shifting forest type due to a lot of different variables.
Pass on Rob.
Oh, sure. Yeah, specific to if you're referencing climate change in the wood procurement world, weather is a primary determinant of how much wood you can harvest. Because if you're doing things right, your loggers are all state trained on BMPs, often certified, and there's rules and regulations where you don't log in extremely wet weather, because you're trying to prevent soil erosion. And so the one thing just in my 10-year span since I've been here, that really sticks out, the news a couple weeks ago about the strong El Nino that's developing. The last one was just 5 years ago. And the impact that that had on wood procurement in the southeast was extremely dramatic. You know, when you normally have a procurement radius to log a mill, it might be, say, 200 miles or 100 miles. When it's wet in the mountains, you can't log at all. So you have to go to 500 miles or 1,000 miles. Next thing you know, you might rail wood from, you know, somewhere that's not in the southeast. So if you're down the coast and playing in sandy soils, there's things that can work a little bit better for you, but it definitely presents challenges in the mountains with terrain, with these strong El Nino patterns that come along. You know, that's it's a big impact on the livelihood of the folks that we rely on to harvest our timber. They operate on extremely thin margins. So disruptions from weather or prolonged weather events or climatic in nature, like a strong El Nino that could last for 12 months, they have a really dramatic effect on the ability for those folks to really stay in business.
So I'm having a hard time just picking one. Alex took my go-to with densification and regeneration. Talk about utilization. One of my key ones right now is workforce development. So we're really not producing many foresters out of the surrounding forestry schools anymore. We're not having as many folks coming out of the technical colleges anymore. We're losing our loggers. They're aging out, and the price of equipment and supplies, the younger generation is not getting into logging. And we don't have many crews working in the woods doing the invasive species or the mid-rotational thinning or the crop tree releases. So really getting people interested in working in the woods and taking care of the environment and workforce development.
Yeah, my dad said he used to manage by benign neglect and just leave nature alone and take care of itself. And that might have worked 50 years ago, but sadly now with non-native invasive species, climate change, and past mismanagement has been alluded to, things are changing and we need to take active step. And one of the big impacts of the Canton paper mill closing is the mismanagement that's gone on because of simple economic forces. The most valuable trees are the ones that are being cut for the most profit, and the less valuable, less desirable trees, both economically and ecologically, were being left behind. And it was this high-grade harvesting the best, leaving the rest. That's degraded our forests. It's been going on for decades. And now, without a market for those low-grade trees, it's probably going to be a great increase just because there's no market for those low-grade trees. So that's the big issue I see, the high-grade harvesting, the removal of the fittest, really the emphasis of the evolution going on out there is the biggest impact.
As a land trust, we think a lot about the future of our forests, as we all do up here, but also development pressure, and we try to be pretty strategic of, we work with landowners to protect their land. So sometimes that's a permanent conservation easement, sometimes that's buying land. And we try to be strategic about where we're working. And when we think about the forested landscapes, that often equates with corridors. You know, how can we keep these forests connected for animal movement, for climate change, for species to move, for just the overall health of the forest. And right now, with Asheville metropolitan area expanding a lot, and you know, I work primarily for the Conservancy in Haywood County and Jackson County. I was born and raised in Haywood in the Bethel, Canton area, and with the mill closure and a lot of people have been impacted by this mill closure, and my heartfelt, my heart goes out to everyone impacted in a lot of different ways. And really all of Western North Carolina is impacted. And I think as a Conservancy right now, we're thinking a lot about how is that mill closure going to affect real estate sales and how is it going to affect development in Canton. But it's really across the whole area. You know, the Asheville metropolitan area is expanding and some of those key wildlife corridors are unprotected. And so an example is the Haywood-Buncombe line. It's largely forested, but it's largely unprotected. So over time, you see more and more development happening on that Buncombe-Haywood line, which is going to cut out a key wildlife corridor and forested corridor for species. So as a land trust, we're always trying to work ahead of the curve, and we can always, if we can buy bigger tracts and protect bigger tracts, it's much more expensive, it's much less expensive than trying to piece these tracts together when they're all parcelized way further in the future. Not that far in the future, but that's what like the triangle in Raleigh is facing right now. It's like people want corridors for recreation, for outdoor activity, for habitat, and they're having to piece together really expensive, tiny tracts to make it happen. What can we do now to protect some of the larger tracts while we still have the time and opportunity? And for us, the challenge is always resources and costs and people to do the work, as well as how do we take care of the land we do own. You know, we have partnerships here to help us with that. But we can talk more about that later.
As a descendant of the original sovereign people of this landscape, the biggest challenge has been hearing our voices heard again. And we're at that time where our voices are being heard again in the 21st century, what you guys call forestry. We have a relationship with this landscape. And sometimes that relationship is very hard for y'all to understand. As silviculturists, as biologists, sometimes just listening to what this forest is telling you is meaningful. And sometimes that can guide what you guys call management. We call it relationship. And the biggest challenge outside of that is getting some of these shared ideas. We have these same challenges. We have engaging our youth, reestablishing the trust. Currently, our department, our Natural Resource Department, has created an advisory group. And that advisory group is reflective of 7 enrolled members who all are fluent speakers of our language. Our language comes from this landscape. And we have 3 academic advisors that are monitoring how we are archiving, how we are engaging in these relationships that we have now. We've never had before. And it is a pleasant time to be in this time because it ignites an interest in our community. And when you have that, you have people coming out with ancient stories, ancient ways of managing life and understanding the landscape, the waters, the rocks, the lizards, everything. It's phenomenal, the things that come out of our community that are still there. And so hearing these things and trying to understand how to incorporate them into what you guys call science is a challenge. Because some plants are double dormant, as we know. Indigenous people respect what double dormancy is. We don't necessarily have to know all things. And that sometimes is very hard to convey to people who are not indigenous. But we're open-minded. Our community, once you get to know our community, once you sit with our community, once you hear the voices of our community, once you hear the languages, how, when we bring up a topic and how they start talking Cherokee, it's magic. And to be able to capture that and to place it in these opportunities we have now with our neighbors, we have the longest living relationship with this landscape, and we also have the longest living relationship with the federal government. So we know all the constraints and all the pains and all that stuff. And so that's not really a challenge. The challenge is staying consistent. So as we move forward, some tribes, some of our tribal brothers and sisters across the United States and up to Alaska are on this kit called land back. Now, yeah, I said it. I said land back. But the message that I would like to convey, where we are coming from, actually where I would like to be positioned at, is called land forward with indigenous lands. And so that is probably going to be a challenge. It's probably going to be a challenge for some of you all to support. We weren't really fond of leaving landscapes untouched. We engaged in the landscape. We had a relationship, remember? And sometimes that landscape said, burn it. We burned it. Sometimes those big old growth forests said, we make good canoes. We need canoes. And so bringing all this knowledge back in the 21st century is going to be a challenge, but I think with everybody having an open ears and more importantly, an open heart, I think that we can make an impact. So I just ask you all to be kind to your fellow stewards of this land as we move forward.
I think when I think about all these different challenges, the added complexity of how climate change impacts all these different things, the more frequent and intense storm events, how that exacerbates problems with invasive species. So those are the things that I think about a lot. We've seen those impacts here in North Carolina, whether it was Tropical Storm Fred a year and a half ago, and obviously we get more than our fair share of hurricanes and those sorts of things on the coast as well. And so I see that being an ongoing challenge. It's going to make some of these other challenges that were well articulated even harder to address.
Thank you all. It's crazy to hear all those things, and they all had to pick one. I mean, we could be here all night if we wanted to get into the depth and breadth of challenges in forestry. One thing I didn't mention earlier, those numbers, only 70% of the forests in western North Carolina are privately owned. And we are so lucky to be on the Parkway and see all this beautiful land, all this public land. And I think most folks think that the majority of what we see is public land or conserved land, and it's not. It's privately owned by different people with different values, who value their land for different reasons. I'm hearing from some of them through the text coming in, and there's a lot of concern in relationship to climate change and invasive pests. And how do you prepare for invasive pests? What's the next one going to be? How do we, what's the other one? Let's stop there. Invasive pests from a land management perspective, what are you seeing, what are you doing?
Mike, want to jump on there?
I think the simplest solution, basic one, is diversity. We never know what pest is next. We've had the hemlocks being wiped out. We had the chestnut wiped out. We've had Dutch elm disease. We've had emerald ash borer now. We don't know what the next pest that's going to come in and really attack a species and possibly eliminate that species. So having as diverse a forest as possible makes it much more robust, more likely to withstand the next invasive pest, makes it a more resilient forest. So diversity is one key.
Yeah, just to add on to that, a healthy forest. Okay, so if the trees are healthy, they're growing fast, they're not overstocked, they're not being suppressed. Healthy growing trees can fight off the pests easier than a suppressed tree or an unhealthy tree. So it's really, most of our forests in western North Carolina, they were all cut over early 1900s, 1920s. Most of our forests are 85 to 100 years old. Most of our forests are overstocked. So we can do some work, some tending practices. If we can thin them out, open them up, make them healthier, they are more likely to withstand pests of any sort.
The one thing that I've seen is extremely helpful is the presence of a well-written management plan for your forest, written by a forester. Foresters are scientists, and they're going to use the best available scientists to write that plan for you and your landscape. Some of the landowners that we had in our landowner program, they were managed by the choice of a forestry consultant. It's whoever the landowner wanted. But on multiple occasions, we would walk through that stand with the landowner and the consultant they chose. Telling the story about Richard back there, and we came across a big stand of Oriental bittersweet that Richard was able to catch, incorporate that into their management plan on how to treat it in relation to that harvest activity that they really wanted to see as a family. And we're able to kind of curb that population of Oriental bittersweet on that stand, when normally, without that forest management plan, without that knowledgeable forester on site writing that for them, potentially they could have just had a bid sale. The logger could have come in and cut right through all that patch, not only just propagated it on site, but also spread it to other sites. And so there's a lot of just nuts and bolts of good forest management like that you can get with good consulting, forest management plans that address those issues, and good practices in the field as well. So just wanted to mention that.
I've had a great follow-up question. One, to make sure that y'all don't nerd out too much. What is desertification? See, come on now, somebody knows.
Generally, shift in species to more shade tolerant, kind of moister forests that are, with the big issue is fewer oaks and hickory trees and mass producing species that are important for wildlife, nuts, acorns, hickory nuts and things. Those forests become less prone to fire, which is maybe a good thing, but it's a species shift that results in more shade tolerant species that are more able to reproduce beneath each other, beneath themselves, and perpetuate the same species in the absence of disturbances.
Add one more thing about invasive species is policy around prescribed burning. In the current farm bill that's going through the State House right now, there's language in that farm bill that's specific to prescribed burning. And so both state policy and local policy with our county commissioners, in some regions of the state, there's a very aggressive approach towards prescribed burning near cities. It's really difficult to do prescribed burning in the first place with the challenges of the wind being in the right place and the weather being in the right place. But if we want to help prevent invasive species, fire has to be a part of it. And policies that are overly restrictive on prescribed fire are just not helpful. And so engage with your local politicians that are here and talk to them about how they feel about prescribed burning in this county. Its use. So.
We had a follow-up question. Some folks were interested in what some of the invasive plants were that are causing some of the problems, and how they can identify them or do anything about it. You'll notice throughout here, we have some of those. We have 6 invasive plants throughout the building. I don't know if you have taken advantage of it, but if you could name all 6 and go back and see Willow at the table, we have t-shirts and hats for those folks that can name all 6. So I won't tell you what they are, but if y'all like to speak to some of the invasive plants and what can landowners do that can help keep them in check.
Well, I've got the microphone, so I'll jump on that a little bit. It's one of the things I said like earlier, you can't just leave nature alone anymore because we haven't for 100, 200 years, and we have invasive plants. If you don't do anything about them, they will get worse. So the number one thing is to be aware of these things that are out there and then take steps to control them. There's lots of options how you want to do that, but doing nothing is going to make things worse. In this case, it takes active steps to address them. Some of these vines either will climb and kill mature healthy trees if they're left alone. Other invasive trees will take over and displace the native trees. There's some serious threats out there.
I'm going to add one thing to that. We can talk about specific species of invasive, but almost all these invasives come from plantings at people's homes. Comes from stuff people buy at Lowe's, Home Depot, local farm garden. A lot of them around here, there's an epicenter. And it's right here, 26 and 40. There's a large property there. Epicenter of invasive species here in Western North Carolina. So when you're doing your yard work, you want to plant stuff, just plant native. Research what you're trying to plant. Because a lot of these plants, once they get outside your yard, they go crazy.
Michael, you brought up earlier the overcrowding that's going on in forests, and that's kind of connected to the closing of the Canyon paper mills. A lot of the things that would get taken out of the forest in order to create healthier forests, there's no longer a market for that. We have a question about what would make, are there any industries in a position to make up for the loss of the Canyon mill? And what would make small diameter and undesirable trees more profitable in this area? Anybody have that magic answer there?
Tommy's got a good one. I've heard it before. Baskets. Ooh.
Give it a shot, Tom.
It's on.
Could you simplify that question?
That's a deep one.
What do we want to do with the increase? Well, all right, so an example of what we have been doing is, you guys know how awesome our Cherokee baskets are, right? You guys know how beautiful they are. What you don't know is the dimensions of the base of a white oak, the dimensions of a white oak tree can fill. Those dimensions I'll share with you because I work with a lot of basket makers, and they want you all to know that what has in the past been cut down left as slash or pole, basket maker can make probably $1,000 off that pole. And those dimensions are anything from a 4 to 6 inch diameter, all the way up to about 18 on the larger side. Growing in a natural setting where it's natural competition, where it's not branching out. That basket maker can get probably now 2 medium-sized baskets out of that dimension for about $1,200 a piece for a medium-sized basket. But it's just not the white oak. There's other forest products involved. There's bloodroot, there's walnut, depending on what basket maker's style. There's also the addition of river cane. So when you're talking about how to put a price on a product that is going to be increased, we are working with folks in the region, silviculturists, to kind of identify where these places are on the landscape that could potentially be available. And so it's a learning curve, right? I mean, if we're going to have an increase in wood that would be basically taken to a mill for pulp, there's another interest in it. Then why not kind of supply and reestablish and keep legacies going that are true to this landscape? So I don't know if I really nailed the question from a forester's standpoint about that. But from a Cherokee standpoint, that's my answer.
And I would add, some of the markets that we hear about are the proper scaled biomass. And you hear about biomass in the eastern part of the state that's going over to Europe. And that's not what I'm referring to when I talk about proper scale, or local or community scale where it was utilized here. Biochar, I think, has also been mentioned as a potential market. Obviously, it's going to require a lot of infrastructure for whatever it requires to produce this new product. And I would imagine if it was easy, somebody would have already swooped in and be doing it right now.
Yeah, and I think, Lang, just to add to that, I think there's not going to be one solution. It has to be properly scaled. It's going to look differently. It has to be, based on what we have, how we can better utilize material. So it's probably going to look a lot of different ways. And there's other places in the country where, I worked on Santa Fe National Forest in northern New Mexico, but New Mexico before coming here, and we just really didn't have any market for the, trees that had grown up after a century of fire suppression. And so what do we do? And so other places have kind of had this challenge, so we're going to have to learn from a lot of others about what solutions are there.
Yeah, just to add to what James said, scale is really the word. A lot of people think about forestry at the stand level, right? You think about how you want to improve that stand right there, or you drive past a conversion from a forest to a development. You think about that stand right there. The thing with a paper mill or extremely large pulpwood consumer is the scale. It's irreplaceable. It just is. It's for the magnitude. Most pulp mills in North America consume about 2 million tons of wood a year. All right, so that's equivalent to 100,000 truckloads a year. Truckloads are about 40 feet long, so you can do the math and convert it to miles. If you line them up back to back, it's astounding. I think I did it one time. It's like, the entire state of North Carolina on I-40. If you line trucks up, that's the scale of a paper mill. It's 100,000 truckloads of wood fiber a year. And that equates to a radius, right? I mean, more or less, that doesn't just exist in your back door, right? We've lived amongst the national forest now for 113 years. And have survived even though the Forest Service only harvested 800 acres in many years. So it goes to that other 70% of the land base that's privately held, that are having private timber sales on their own property for their own purposes. That's what paper mills genuinely exist on, not public land. Very rarely are they fully existent on public land anymore. But the other thing to contemplate is it's not just the Canyon Mill. It's the Calhoun, Tennessee Mill. It's the Kingsport, Tennessee Mill. So every pulpwood consumer of scale using the same number of loads of pulpwood per year has shut. Within the last 4 years, okay? So now you have to go to Covington, West Virginia before you get to a large-scale pulpwood consumer in the Appalachians. Everything in the South has been shut. So it's not just, Western North Carolina, even though I know that's what we're focused on here. It is an extremely large-scale issue that is the entire Southern Appalachian region. And those, East Tennessee, the economic development folks, they're out scrambling for the same industries that North Carolina is, because they understand it's not just the folks in the mill, it's the 5,000, folks that work in that wood supply chain that get impacted by a mill closure. And there just really is no other alternative. That doesn't necessarily mean that all the logging jobs shut down in the world. We still have some sawmills left. I mean, that's the other thing that we forget. Like, this was big news, but just a handful of years ago, we had an investor from a foreign country that came and bought several sawmills in Western North Carolina and shut all of them down. Not only shut them down, but scrapped them. Decimated the saw timber market in Western North Carolina. So you have 5 or 6 sawmills that are gone, 0 saw timber consumption. Now the pulp mill's gone. It is dire, right? So there's very, very, very few folks left that are skilled to handle the logging that most of the people in this room would like to see, which is, really skilled because they have that diversity of markets to go to. It's going to be challenging road ahead for maintaining a viable logging force in the region. So you're right, Lane, the energy sector is, you look on a lot of just the other thing about scale, and I'll shut up, is the logistics around that scale. And when you talk about bioenergy, your distance from the port matters. The price that you have to pay for a delivered log really, really matters. So logging in the coastal plain is relatively cheap compared to logging in the mountains. You're closer to the port of the coastal plain, and that's why you see most of those projects that are freight lodging to a port down there. Came from an FRA meeting last week. There was a lot of good discussion on bioenergy there, and the reliance on that logistics component. And there are technologies out there, sustainable aviation fuel. If you look at Delta and United, all the big airlines right now, they're proclaiming that by 2030, that 50% of all of their fuel will come from some cellulosic biofuel, trees, right? If you look on the biochar folks, they're already generating power from biochar in Europe because there's a carbon tax. We don't have a carbon tax here. We have extremely cheap access to natural gas and other fossil fuels that make those investments very challenging to compete against in an open market. So it's tough, tough situation. But I do have faith. I think that some innovation, I think it will grow.
So all this talk of challenges is making me want to drop an F-bomb. Funding. I said it. Funding. If we don't have markets for where it shows that removing these trees improve forest health, helps battle invasive plants, how are landowners and people responsible for managing their land, where traditionally our demand for products allow loggers and industries to go and remove trees. And in the absence of that, how are we going to do the work that's necessary to keep forests healthy?
You started, I'll take that.
So this is just one part of the solution, right? And I will say, conservation of if a landowner, if you have 200 acres and you're wondering what to do with it, and you've traditionally worked with a forester, with a logger to log it, and the economy isn't there for pulpwood or what you're trying to achieve. I would say conservation is a route to bring funding to landowners in general. It doesn't bring all the funding, and sometimes it's a one-time pot of funding, but conservation and land trusts are there to help landowners who maybe are land rich, cash poor. We work with farmers, we work with landowners who own forests to protect their land. And sometimes we can bring grant money and private funds. There are private funders in this area who really want to see forests protected and for the long term. And sometimes protection doesn't mean like keeping it, like we're talking about keeping it just untouched. It can mean active stewardship and a relationship with the forest and management. So I'd say that conservation can be part of the discussion, but it's not the only thing.
Okay, so funding to get it done, cost share programs. So state foresters, we manage and run a handful of different cost share programs, as well as the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They've got one that covers a lot of this type of work. Now, it does require an out-of-pocket cost of a landowner, but depending on these cost share programs and what needs to get done, it can cover 100% of the cost, or it might go down to 40% of the cost. So there's a lot of different cost share programs out there. So if somebody wants to get something done that's recommended in their management plan for the small diameter wood, or wanting to work on oak regeneration to prevent messification, or short-leaf pine, or anything like that, we do have a lot of cost share programs. Contact your local folks with the North Carolina Forest Service or in our CS office.
I'll mention the FDP, also in the State House right now. There's funding for that state program that you were just mentioning.
So that's with NPP?
Yeah, Forest Development Program. And there's funds also going through the House now for state foresters to give advice to landowners to help write management plans as well to cover that cost. So again, it's that public policy piece can't be understated. It's always going to be important anywhere you go.
I'll just say, on the work that we do on the National Forest with partners, the good news is that we're in a place right now where there's probably more funding available than we've seen in a very long time between the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill. We recently were awarded funding on the Pisgah National Forest for the Pisgah Restoration Initiative. So that's 10 years of funding to do good work on the ground for prescribed burning, for doing work to restore fire-adapted ecosystems. So there is, we do have an opportunity with more funding available to do the right work on the ground than we've seen in a long time. And I think the partnerships and things that we have, we're well situated to take advantage of that.
So with a diverse landowner base, forest issues and challenges don't stop at the boundary line. And I think about Southern Appalachian working with private landowners. I think about Eastern Band working with the National Forest, and the State Forest working with private landowners. I'd like to have you all talk a little bit about working with each other. We did have a question that asked about, is it possible for the tension between conservation and responsible production? Can they coexist? And when I saw that question, I thought about the work that I know that a lot goes on together. I don't know if y'all can speak to that.
Well, I'll start. Especially because of our land ownership pattern in the east, where national forests are interspersed and are only a small portion of the landscape in terms of the forested land. If we're going to make a difference on a landscape or watersheds, we have to be working across boundaries. We have to be thinking about how private forest land, how we work with our tribal partners to do work at the scale that's needed. So that's, I mentioned the project on the Pisgah, that's part of the idea behind that project is looking at a broader landscape. And I know we're working with EcoForesters to see where some of the work you all are doing with private landowners links up with the national forest. So to address some of the challenges we talked about earlier, we have to be thinking at that scale. Because we can get everything right on the forest, on the national forest, which we're a long way from that. But that isn't going to make the difference on the scale that we need.
Well, I think they can coexist. I mean, things have coexisted for years, and we coexisted for millennia on this landscape and did awesome things to it. So, yeah, I think they can coexist. You just never know. You probably not going to get some of the crumbs that you would love to get, but you need to kind of figure out what you can settle with. So, yeah, I definitely think coexist. Partnerships, through understanding, through different objectives, the invasive conversation earlier led me to think that we are in a place now where we have relationships with some of our local scientists and biologists on the state of the science of some of these invasives and their impact on some of these culturally significant plants that are native to this area that was to be used. So that's something that we're tapping into to help kind of prioritize where we can, through partnerships, kind of encourage forward ones on the landscape.
Yeah, as a land trust, we're always trying to think about landscapes and building on, like what I talked about with corridors. And a lot of that work is, starting one area and one landowner will work with us. This was Sandy Mush. Bill Duckett started to work with us, and then he told other landowners, and then that kind of snowball effect, and now, thanks to a lot of people in Sandy Mush, a lot of it's protected. And I think, conservation easements, if you have your land, you still own your land, but you have a conservation easement on your land that we hold or a land trust hold. A lot of them allow for forestry, and actually, most all of them allow for some kind of forestry. Some allow commercial forestry, some don't. That's a lot of landowner intention from the beginning and negotiating that initial document, as well as what kind of funding goes into paying for that conservation easement. But on a landscape scale, I think we try to be a resource as a land trust to connect landowners with, here are some resources. We don't have all the answers, but we can point to our partners, EcoForesters, to help landowners with resources, or cost share with NC Forest Service. So as a land trust, we're always trying to kind of make those connections for landowners, as well as work on the land we own. And it's the people up here that's been more possible these days. Sure.
So speaking of relationships with land trusts and a collaborative effort, we have a story to tell, and the story starts in Macon County. Some of you all know we're in Wazee Mountain, it isn't Cowee Mountain, you might be from Macon County. So an interesting story is that land trust at the time was the Tennessee Land Trust, and now it's Mainsprings. I was assigned a project by our executive office, by our chief's office, to submit an abstract to support tribes being available to, or having the privy to engage in the community forest open space program. And so we did, with the help of the Wilderness Society, with the help of Mainsprings, with the help of the Forest Service, with the help of the North Carolina Forest Service, and the private industry with the EcoForesters, Forest Stewards. We all collectively came together, and now we have approximately, I think it's 136 acres back in tribal ownership. But none of that could have happened if we didn't have this collaborative effort. And so it can happen, it can coexist. And one of the biggest challenges at the time was, how do these people think about Indians taking back some of their land? And to be honest with you, the Rose Creek community was very awesome. The Cowee Community Club in that area was very awesome. And it was a well-embraced transaction. So, in this program, we have to have a forest management plan for it. We provided a forest management plan for it, and we have some successful burns on it. And just a couple weeks ago, we harvested the first plywood tree for a basket. So that's kind of how, on a very micro scale, we're talking about the monster of bulk stretching, all across the North Carolina. But if it can exist on a micro scale, it can grow into something that's very beneficial for the right scale.
Yeah, we're very lucky here that we got such a diversity of people that care and groups that care about these things. And EcoForesters is lucky because we have great partnerships, getting major grants from the Forest Service, working with the tribe and our cultural history here, having land trust partners we can work with to protect the land. State Forest Service meetings here. The canned paper mill was the only sustainable, a certified sustainable mill around here actively doing this here and having educators out there and investors involving in these things. All these things, it takes the whole partnership. We can't do it ourselves by any means. We're a pretty small fish in the pond, but it's really a pretty good, robust conservation community here. And the other challenge we talked about is putting together conservation, and I actually redefine conservation rather than putting it together with you, but conservation really is the wise use of our natural resources for the greater good forever, for everyone out there. And EcoForesters' mission is basically, there's no conflict between stewardship and even sustainable timber harvesting. And having that mill, you have to cut some of those small, low-value trees to do sustainable timber harvesting. They can certify that for you. And having those products, timber is a renewable product. It is a sustainable thing. It has a much lower carbon footprint than steel or cement or plastic. It's far superior to those. If that forest is made sustainably and it comes back, it can be a win-win. It can even be done profitably and beneficially, I believe, and EcoForesters believes. And that's a mission that's not as easy to sell as just, let's just preserve the land and leave it alone. We can use it and use it wisely and actually improve it if it's done well. So that's the big picture. It takes the whole partners to do this here, everyone coming together and finding that common ground for things. But that's where my passion is, that's where our mission is, and that's why we're here tonight.
I'm just going to second what he said. I can't say any better.
Yeah, I agree. Andy pretty much just did the right summary. I was just going to say that beyond North Carolina, in the US and internationally, really the largest and most sophisticated conservation organizations have embraced active forest management as a conservation avenue. And it's no longer terribly controversial. 20 years ago, yes. And there are still many environmental organizations that are not comfortable with that. But the most sophisticated and the largest conservation organizations have recognized that active forest management and the impact on many more acres, as Annie said, working forest conservation easements, is a great way to keep forests as forests.
This is great, and by no surprise, time is running short. There's so much that you could talk about, but I want to make sure that we leave here, or the people here leave knowing of the really cool stuff, successful stuff that y'all are doing in your forests. And I wonder if you could just share any projects, any programs, things that you're doing that will show that inspire us.
Oh God, please tell me there's one.
Well, this kind of may have the smell of concluding remarks, so I just want to point out that this seems like sort of a doom and gloom group, a lot of the things we've been talking about, but foresters are extremely creative, hardworking, problem-solving people, and so in light of the challenges and pest and pathogen problems and headaches and shifting species compositions, forestry people are optimists and long-term in the way that they think. So I just want to make sure we point that out, that we dwell on a lot of the problems and wake up unhappy a lot of times, but this is actually, people who commit themselves to this kind of work are terrific people. One thing we haven't talked a whole lot about is forest carbon, climate change, and the role that forests will play in mitigating climate change. most of what I spend my time doing is working on new forest carbon development, the development of new forest carbon projects. And a number you can take home with you is that forests will account for about 20% of the solution. They have been for a long time, and will continue to mitigate about 20% of the impacts of fossil fuel burning. And pay attention to a lot of the criticism and scrutiny of forest carbon projects that you read about. A lot of that's true. It's helping to make these projects better. But don't discard forests and the role they're playing, and not just sequestering atmospheric carbon and storing it in trees, but storing it in solid wood products instead of cement and steel, which are much more carbon intensive. So long-term, 100-year types of perspective, the best thing we could be doing is putting carbon into boards, into houses for long-term storage, and regenerating forests and having them grow back again.
Maybe not in forest, but a cool thing about forestry that we're working on with North Carolina Forestry Association. You've heard a lot about education earlier. And we have successfully been working with the Department of Public Construction for the last year, developing a natural resources forestry class for through the FFA, or in conjunction with the FFA, to be available in all the high schools across North Carolina. All the high schools in North Carolina currently have a natural resources CTE course available. Depends on which high school you're in, and if your ag program is really strong, if that class is really available for your student. But a lot of times all it takes is just raising your hand and advocating that you really want that class in your public high school. And so that course will come out in the the fall of 2024. Again, for all of our high school students available. There will be a workplace certificate as a part of that, where they'll learn how to do tree ID, plant ID, all kinds of skills that are relevant to natural resources management and forestry, and they'll have that certificate to take folks like the State Forest Service. Also, there'll be 2 hours of credit that can be transferred to a local community college, like Haywood Community College or otherwise, to further their career. So that was my own personal story. I grew up surrounded by forestry, didn't know anything about it until I went to Carolina too, and didn't know. I found myself cruising timber in Oregon one day, like my sophomore year, and I was like, "This is what I'm supposed to be doing," And I had no idea how beautiful of a career that forestry could be until I just fell on it. So certainly a passion of mine is to get that awareness out to young folks that managing our natural resources is critically important. It's an amazing career that's available out there for them, and all kinds of others. Very much a choose your adventure kind of career path. You can go in so many different ways. So please encourage that type of education, be it conservation-minded, preservation-minded, or active forest management-minded. It's all really important. So the more our young folks get to be exposed to it and understand it, the better off the next generation will be.
Okay, something I'm really proud of. Probably the last 10 or 15 years, we've really seen a lot or an increase in the amount of prescribed burning that's been going on in the mountains. We haven't really talked about prescribed burning a whole lot here tonight, but the agencies, the federal U.S. Forest Service, the state agencies have really increased their capacity and where they're putting fire on the ground for the benefit of the ecosystems. And in just the last couple of years, we've been developing what we call PBAs, Prescribed Burn Associations. So this is where we go out, getting groups of landowners interested in burning their own land and working with each other, teaching them how to do it, trying to increase capacity, increase more folks out there that know what they're doing, how to apply fire properly to the landscape. This started probably 5 or 6 years ago down in Sand Hills. Now, just here in the last year, we had our 3rd PBA in the state here in the Southern Blue Ridge area. I believe our PBA coordinator is somewhere out in the audience. I saw Charles earlier. But if you're interested in getting your property, have some controlled burning objectives, or would like to see some prescribed fire on your property, give us a call, or you can look up Southern Blue Ridge Prescribed Burn Association, and might be a landowner near you that wants to help you.
Yeah, there actually are two displays out, one in the back right corner there for EcoForesters success projects we've done. One, Russ Oates, is in the room here somewhere, Russ is. Did some wonderful work on his property, restoring, invested a lot of his own money, and got cost share funding from the USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, to offset some of the costs, but he invested in his property. Another one, Finlander and Mark Yeager, who did a timber harvest. They got certified sustainable by the Canton Paper Mill to cut the low-value trees, an old pine plantation he had there. And then he got cost share funding from the North Carolina Forest Service to go back in and plant oaks. So it was just two fantastic, great projects. Committed landowners can get financial assistance. There is professional help available for them, and you can find that help. You can do some great work on your forest. There are examples of people doing fantastic work out there. Those are just two that you can read about and work if you want. But if you want to do it, talk to me or other forester. We'd love to help you.
Great, yeah, Russ and Stacy Oates are conservation easement landowners too, so that's a good example of conservation easements working with forest management, so thank you both. I think the best thing that Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy is doing and can continue to do is just protect more land of forests, right? That's the best thing we can do, and we've been involved in 90,000 acres of land protection so far, and we're gonna keep going. Yesterday, we just transferred a tract down in Macon County to the U.S. Forest Service, so we're always trying to plug in with our partners and build our protected landscape. And as far as on the habitat stewardship side, we're working with, there's a great coalition for spruce fir restoration in the area. So spruce fir is high elevation, dark forest type that's really cool. The Highlands of Rhone, the Balsam Mountains, and it's home to a lot of really important species and birds, flying squirrel, and that habitat is decreasing and decreasing. And SAC owns land where we can increase that. So we're working with this coalition to actively plant those species and kind of work with those outcompeting species to help. Spruce fir is decreasing largely because of logging practices that didn't cut, the undesirables that turn into pulpwood. That's why we keep talking about why cutting pulpwood trees or the undesirables are so important, is because they outcompete some of these other really important forest types and species. So that's on both ends. Thanks.
So the question was what we're most proud of, right? Well, I'm most proud of that we're still here as the indigenous people of the landscape, and I'm also most proud of the collaboration in my career that I just mentioned when we got the Hall Mountain, which is now going to be Eagle Mountain. I had a request from our speakers consortium to rename it. And so that collaboration was an example of how we can, instead of land back, have land forward with tribal lenses on the landscape. Another thing I'm most proud of is how the talk of our relationship with our federal partners in the region has stimulated 60,000, 70,000 my Eastern Band citizens to start sharing their stories and start wanting to talk, wanting to be engaged. We're still here, we're not going anywhere. And I am most proud of the things that we have been able to cultivate just in the last 5 to 7 years. And so I hope that gate just bust wide open. I hope that we can really do some good things on this landscape in the public land domain. That will give you guys a better appreciation of who we are as indigenous people. And we're an open book, and I would encourage if anybody has any questions to seek one of us out. Our program, when I first started working for my tribe in 2000, was 3 people, including myself. And we're at 35 plus now. We're trying to do multiple things, including a small workforce. Another success story that I'm proud that came out of our department was the story of the sickle-fin redfish, which is a staple food for us. I don't think the North Carolina Fish and Wildlife Commission even knew that fish existed. And so we were able to restore it and bring it back to its natural habitat here in the mountains. So anyway, I hope that this kind of collaboration continues, and I hope that our communities can understand one another and support both sides of what You guys call forestry management, we just call it relationship.
Yeah, some of my best days is when we close on a piece of property that's going to be forever national forest. There's nothing better than that. And so those are some of my best days. I also am very proud of the work that we've done with Tommy and the Eastern Band. We signed a Tribal Forest Protection Act agreement last fall and a Tribal Good Neighbor agreement, the first of its kind in this region of the Forest Service. And we're actively doing work under that agreement now together. I also want to mention a couple things. I mentioned the Tropical Storm Fred and how that impacted Western North Carolina. One watershed over from the Davidson River that saw historic flooding, we had done work with partners to improve aquatic organism passage, to create more habitat for trout, make things safer for people to access for recreation. That Cathy's Creek watershed, we're not doing work on in. We're not having to do recovery work in because we've done that work with partners up front. And that watershed is more resilient. And so that's the type of work that I'm most proud of and excited about, to do that work up front with partners that we know makes a difference in the long run.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. There is things to be hopeful for. I'm fond of saying all of our easy problems have been solved. And what we're talking about now are really complex, intertwined problems. And how we solve them is getting smart people together that are passionate about what they do. Our region is considered the birthplace of modern forestry. If you haven't been to the Cradle of Forestry in Pisgah National Forest, I encourage you to go. It's a great look back in history, what we thought then. The practice of forestry is a lot like history in that you look back in time and see how the decisions you made, how they turned out and how they impacted things. The goal of EcoForesters and all the organizations that are on this stage are making investments now that we can be proud about in the future. I want to thank Tommy for sharing your culture of intentional living. I think we move really fast these days. We're on our phones. And forest management planning is intentional stewarding of your land. And the example that he gives us and your nation gives us is we should pay more attention to, and I thank you for that. So where from here? We don't have any silver bullets. If y'all are looking for silver bullets tonight, we're all out. Instead, we have to make informed decisions. And we're going to monitor our results, and we're going to then adapt as needed. That's forestry in a nutshell. We as a community need to support the efforts of NGOs and agencies as they do this hard work in the woods. I leave you here with hope for future forests and with confidence that our region is filled with smart, caring, engaged professionals that are thinking about the future. We got a lot of great questions that I couldn't get to. We're going to try to answer all of them and then email out if you register for this event. We're recording this event, so hopefully when that's out, we'll be able to share that as well. We've got our table in the back. If you have questions, we'll be happy to answer. If you haven't identified the 6 invasive species and you want to have a shirt, there's still time. And I appreciate y'all coming tonight. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.